Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon wherever we find you. My name's Jamie, and this is Bad News. On the bulletin this week, we have a couple of good stories to sink our teeth into. Firstly, the decision made this week to cede the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, Johnson finds a bug in his bathroom, and free speech suffers at Durham University. Let's get into it. First up, Keir Starmer and his government have reached an agreement with the Mauritian government to hand over the Chagos Islands with a 99-year lease up for renewal for the Diego Garcia military base. This has sparked controversy, particularly from Conservatives, whose government both initiated the proceedings under Truss but stopped them during Lord Cameron's Secretariat. The decision has come from a result of the political establishment feeling pressure from the ICJ and the international community, who ruled in 2019 that the decolonisation process had not yet been completed. Their solution was to make the islands a decolonised colony of Mauritius. Yes, a decolonised colony of Mauritius. Let me break it down. The ICJ wants to decolonise a country by making it a colony of another country. What's more baffling is a response from Chagosians. Apparently, the ICJ began the inquiry on behalf of Mauritius and not on behalf of Chagosians. Many Chagosians want to return home from exile in the UK. This will no longer be possible. Parliamentary Conservatives are very critical. They believe that decisions such as these require parliamentary approval. I would argue any executive decision made technically requires this approval, but the truth is, treaties have already subverted our constitution in the past, the Maastricht Treaty being one, which is the reason for the last 20 years of debate and our eventual exit over the EU being a prime example. This is actually, I'd like to add another issue with Brexit in general, is that instead of taking the opportunity to diverge from the EU, the UK has actually chosen to just copy and paste all of its laws. So nowadays you just have, basically, the UK is still part of the European Union. It just has no trade benefits and an outdated version of their regulation. So it's pretty sad to see, to be honest. Getting back on track, though, let's read a statement from the charity called Chagosian Voices. Mauritius succeeded with the support of the African Union and the UN General Assembly, bringing a case to the International Court of Justice in The Hague in 2019 to determine the decolonisation of Mauritius had been lawfully completed in 1965 when the UK created a new colony. The British Indian Ocean Territory, by separating the Chagos archipelago from the rest of the colony and expelling the whole population, the non-binding advisory opinion ruled that the decolonisation of Mauritius had not been lawfully completed and that the island should be ceded to Mauritius. So, reading at this a little bit more, the Chagosians make the case that the ICJ only dealt with the rights of self-determination of Mauritians, and the question to the court avoided any reference to the Chagosians as people with rights, except as Mauritians. It also says, firstly, Chagosians see themselves as a distinct people living on islands 2,000 kilometres away from Mauritius. They had and have a unique way of life, language and culture. To make things even worse, the case was brought to the ICJ in 2019 without Chagosians' knowledge or consent. So let's have a look at what British civil servants seem to think of the deal and whether or not they can defend themselves sufficiently to see if maybe the idea to cede some of our land to another foreign country that's under the influence of China was actually a good idea. Let's have a look.
Say the Conservative leadership candidates are not happy, including James Cleverly, who says it's weak. Can you just talk to me about James Cleverly's involvement in this deal? He was, of course, open to the negotiations under Liz Truss. I guess those around him would argue, look, it was led by her. He didn't sign the deal, did he? But what was his attitude? You must have picked something up.
Yes, absolutely. No, James Cleverly deserves some credit, actually, for starting these negotiations. Britain's legal position was under threat. We'd lost two law cases in the ICJ and the Law of the Sea Court, and our legal advisors were telling us our position was indeed very weak. That's why they started the negotiations, and he actually pursued them very enthusiastically. I think he's just trying to defend himself from attacks from the other leadership candidates in what he's saying on this. Unfortunately, when David Cameron came in, the trust with the Mauritian government was broken by what David Cameron did by sort of putting the negotiations on pause. And that's why when Keir Starmer came in, he met with the Mauritian Prime Minister and agreed that he would speed up these negotiations, conclude them quickly, and we have to conclude them before the Mauritian elections, which are imminent, because otherwise Mauritius goes into a couple of months of purdah and then the election campaign itself. So it's important to get them done.
What strikes me about these clips is that the civil servant admits that it was a strategic choice from Labour to aid the Mauritians in speeding up the process in time for their election. What I would like to ask is, how the f*** is this our responsibility? Why are we interfering with a foreign election to benefit a government that, one, does not recognise Chagosians as their own people, and two, demands overseas territory that was never theirs? Chagosians themselves are worried about the decision, and as the ICJ and the international community for them, does not represent their interests, and rather it serves the interests of Mauritius instead. Of course, too, there's the fear that other countries will take advantage of our perceived weakness, and you can tut and be in denial about this as much as you wish, but the reality is that most countries, excluding ours obviously, work towards securing the interests of their country rather than the interests of the abstract idea of global social justice. It reminds me of a story of Henry Kissinger. He was addressing his ambassadors. One by one, he asked them what country they represent. The French delegate said France, the German said German. He reminded them all that they ultimately represent America and their interests, not the countries that they visit. I think this is a feature of liberal democratic civil servants. They're brought in to be impartial, and that perceived impartiality is used as a weapon against assertive or self-benefiting strategies that a government can't be too confident in itself, and if it already is, subsequent decisions must reflect their misplaced shame on the very system that gave them the status they enjoy today. While we may be assured that this decision was not one taken in weakness, and that the policy has no bearing on Gibraltar or the Falklands, we should understand that our self-perception and the perception of the US is irrelevant compared to our adversaries' perception of us. Argentine politicians see this as an opportunity, make no mistake. We may see more developments as the week drags on, but what I can guarantee is that there won't be a mirror ball for when you get home. There won't be celebrations or thanks from decolonization-oriented countries. They will only use this to push harder against us, to take more from us, to expand themselves, and to develop their own imperialism or colonial ambitions, and essentially, that's what we've done, given the Chinese alliance a stronghold off the coast of Africa. Next up, the media are revelling in Johnson hysteria again, bringing in an excerpt from his memoir to the forefront of political news. This time, it's quite a juicy one. And no, he hasn't gotten another bombshell blonde pregnant. No, this time, in fact, he alleges that Bibi Netanyahu, while on a visit to Johnson at number 10, disappeared to the toilet for an unusual amount of time. He writes, "The other Bibi repaired for a while. It may or may not be a coincidence, but I'm told it later, when they were doing a regular sweep for bugs, they found a listening device in the Thunderbox." He also described an awkward situation where he tried to pass off a Bic pen as Lord Balfour's pen, which he used to sign the Declaration, which is admittedly hilarious. This comes after very similar allegations were made in 2018 when the Trump administration made the same claims against Netanyahu's government. Obama was also accused too of bugging offices, with Angela Merkel's complaint to this extent being leaked by Edward Snowden. Can we all just admit that if you're not trying to bug your allies' toilets and meeting rooms, you're totally missing out? We're clearly all doing it. And next up, this next story. Durham University's oldest society, the Debating Society, was banned from their Freshers' Fair last week over sensitivity concerns. The Telegraph reports the 3,000-member-strong society, formed over 180 years ago, was banned from the Freshers' Fair following a string of racism allegations. The society is independent from the university and has no formal obligations towards it. This means that while the society can't be shut down, the university has the power to exclude it from its event calendar. The student union claimed that the society played host to parliamentary-style debate and tuxedo-clad provocateurs, and this debate society prefaced this statement with the accusation that the current president's unambiguous dislike of the society was behind the cancellation. This brings into the forefront the importance of the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which was initially drafted to prevent these kinds of things happening. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, has stalled this legislation in favour of an approach that favours perceived group sensitivities over the rights of individuals to express themselves freely on campus. The university has taken the smart route and has decided not to get involved, as both bodies are independently governed. They did, however, allow the Debate Society to use other venues elsewhere in the university, stating that they are supportive of free speech within the law. We will see if they really mean it soon. This is a good example of feminine politics playing out in front of us. Longhousing, polite and passive pressure, the demands to implement inclusion, diversity and equity within their own society, to tell them how to govern themselves, and then to force them to break their own principles in the favour of their own. Book breaking. It is the most effective facet in which these parasitical activists shame, degrade, and book break principled individuals into laying over and letting them dictate how to organise your life, and how you choose to live it, and what you choose to think. Free speech is paramount, at all levels. The student union does not, despite the claim that it does, support free speech in any meaningful way. They want something that appears as free speech, but is heavily filtered under the sensitivity clauses that favour certain groups over others. DEI is a form of forced equity, a collectivist invention that assumes the inferiority of anyone who isn't white before making them their wards, unable to speak for themselves unless they say the right thing, unable to pursue self-actualization in the face of blank slatism, the idea that all humans are inherently capable of the same things, and that this reality must be enforced, but only in a way that seeks aesthetic quality, one where the rooms look colourful but conversations are not. Everyone is a radical but nobody feels the pang of motivation to speak out, that autonomous impartial object of the voice compelling you to speak. It's becoming a boring world, the one of education, although most students are pretty reasonable when you do speak to them. But for the minority of losers who chair their students' unions, it's hard to find anyone who doesn't prefer the idolatry of our intolerant enemies, of Islamism and communism, than the pride of studying at a historical British institution. They prefer the imagery of a society in collapse, rather than one built on mutual respect and sustainable political conflict. But yeah, that's all I've got to say about that story, to be honest. I think free speech is super important, especially in universities. And accusations of, using slurs is not enough to shut down an entire debating society with 3,000 members. There are always going to be heated exchanges and controversial remarks. But at the end of the day, the process is what is important. And banning that process does not help society whatsoever. It just helps your ego. That's all. But anyway, that's me for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Yeah, have a good week, guys. There's a lot in the news this week. I wanted to cover a lot more, to be honest. Laura Kunzenberg, I feel really sorry for her, by the way, because you might have heard this week that she accidentally sent all of her notes to Boris Johnson before their interview, and she's had to cancel, which is just such a shame, genuinely such a shame. I don't have anything else to say. I don't have, a judgment about the situation. I just feel sorry for her. That's all I can say. It is also quite funny, though, so I did find it quite funny, but I would like to say, this episode goes out to Laura Kunzberg, who, fucked up, but we all make mistakes like that sometimes, genuinely. We've all sent the wrong email or the wrong DM to someone at once, it's just a shame that it was the most important email of her career, or one of them. So yeah, Laura, I feel sorry for you. Anyway, have a good week, guys. Enjoy.